Because to have a historian's training is a really very specific thing, a very specific mindset, and there are a set of professional practices and assumptions that are to do with technical things about how you research and then how you present your findings and where you position yourself, and that are completely different from what a fiction writer does, or even a sort of lay person like me writing non-fiction. But that said, some of the most exciting times that I've had have been in archives. So, I'm very happy to talk about archives. It's funny because you often don't associate the word archive with the word excitement, but I absolutely do. And funnily enough, sometimes it's very odd. You don't know what you're going to find. Last year I found myself in an archive looking at people's diaries from 100 years ago. And so the mother of George Orwell, I was looking at her diary, and when he was 2 years old. And I couldn't believe that they let me into the University College Library and they just said, here's the box of stuff, here you go. And I didn't have to have white gloves, there was no one watching me. I just thought, I can't believe this. And there I am opening Orwell's mother's diary from 1904, in which she says things like, baby's sick, baby's still sick, and then she says, baby getting better. And so it's George Orwell that she's talking about, or the baby who became George Orwell. And then she says, baby much better, went for a walk. And then the last entry on that page is baby's first word, and she's got inverted commas, beastly. And then you just think to yourself, you're looking at this and it's George Orwell's mother saying that his first word, totally in character with the George Orwell that we know and love, was beastly. It's very exciting. So my first book, Stasiland, which is actually on the curriculum for HSC, but it's on the literature curriculum. But it is a work of non-fiction that was written not so long after the Berlin Wall fell. So I was dealing with then very recent history, and I was talking to people who worked for the Secret Service in East Germany, the Stasi, and people who they spied on, their victims and resisted. So a lot of that research was oral history, I guess you might call it. I was interviewing people. But the files that I did look at were the files that the Secret Service had kept on people. So they were the files of the spies that had never been intended to be an archive, but which were a secret, malicious archive delving into people's private world in order to essentially manipulate them or bribe them. So I got access to that as well. So if you're in the very fortunate position where you're looking at recent events to make a work of prose, whether that's history or non-fiction writing of some other kind, you can go and talk to the people who are also in that archive, and that way you get a sort of stereo view, I guess, and you're able to represent them and their response to the information that was held about them. And it may be that in 50 years' time, people can look at the internet the same way and say, this is the material that Google knew or held about us, or that was on the internet about this person. But this is how they really felt. Whether private life will survive the internet is a question, in a way, that's raised by my book Stasiland, which is about the world that finished nearly 30 years ago. So I guess what I'm saying is you can look at all different sources, and whatever you look at, if you look at it closely enough, it will have ramifications for now, because you're looking about what human beings do or did to one another. And what I'm interested in is those power relationships, and they don't really change. So the technologies change. The form of the archive might be paper, endless amounts of paper like the Stasi archive, or it might be in the future, websites. But those relationships about who holds what information on whom in an archive will be the same, and they're very interesting. I have to say there's a kind of visceral excitement about looking at the real thing. So it's a bit like the difference between, watching a movie about the beach and going to the beach or something like that. So I think it's fantastic that you can access archives around the world and find extraordinary amounts of information. It's like, like this sort of massive act of generosity is uploading everything to be accessible globally is extraordinary. For my novel, All That I Am, I did have a look in quite a number of archives of, say, court documents in Switzerland from the 1930s, because one of my characters, who was based on a real bloke who was an absolutely shocking piece of work, and ended up having a trial, and there were, trial documents that I could get hold of from Switzerland without going there, so that was amazing. It's not quite the same as, say, another project that I've worked on where I ended up in the State Library in Victoria looking at a letter book from a very early explorer who was marooned in Australia, and he was actually imprisoned later in Mauritius, and I could read his letters back to Britain, and they were in handwriting in his letterbook. So a letterbook was where he wrote his first draft, which was really angry, along the lines of, "Get me out of here," and then to the authorities in England, and then you could read the good draft on the other side, which was a copy of the letter he sent, which was much more polite. "Dear sir, if you wouldn't mind, I'm finding myself in difficult circumstances," and so on. So you get this sense of human need and anger and emotional response, which is what a novelist is interested in. And then you get how that needed to be transmuted into official speak, with the anger and emotion taken out in order to be an effective letter back to the administration in Britain. So looking at that, as it were, I did have white gloves on, I think, that time, for real, is very exciting. I find that more exciting than looking online, although looking